from Northern Ireland originally. I grew up during the Troubles. I also have a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. So I've experienced and lived with challenges in terms of violence and war in Northern Ireland. And I've also experienced and lived with disability throughout my adult life. Both of those experiences have given me much strength, much independence, and much of a way of considering and seeing the world through a particular critical lens in terms of what I perceive as correct, right, ethical, and wrong. And I very much come to my work with the aim of achieving and working for inclusion with all the colleagues I work with, whether they're my PhD students, my undergraduate students, my school pupils, the mentors we train, the leaders I work with in schools, etc. So very briefly, in Northern Ireland, I set up the first cross-community young persons youth club. I was aged 13, 14 at the time in Enniskillen. Now, for those of you that will remember the Troubles, the history of Northern Ireland, Enniskillen was a place of much war, fighting, turmoil. We had one of the worst bombs at the time back in the 1980s. And one of my thoughts at the time as a young person who'd been brought up by two parents who had been first in the family to go to university was that education is obviously important and valued. My family value me. I think this could be a way to try and make change happen in my community. Why have we got separate schools for Catholics and for Protestants? Why is there this division? How are we going to stop the war in my country? So in Enniskillen, I set up the first cross-community group for young people aged 13, 14. And that was quite an insightful learning experience. I also got involved in youth community work in Enniskillen, and I led a group of students when I was at university in Belfast in setting up homework clubs in West Belfast, just off the Falls Road, also during the war, during the Troubles period. So those experiences really added to my insight of the way in which poverty and disability and war can impact on a person's ability to learn and to progress and to achieve. And I think there's a lot of overlap to my work with what we were hearing in the keynote this morning, which was incredibly powerful, really gave me much energy to stand up here and speak to you again after that talk this morning. It really reassured me and reaffirmed my belief that the work I'm doing is right, is just, has a purpose. And I think we all know, those of us working in the area of special education, needs, disability and inclusion, that we are going through, or not arguably, we are going through a crisis period in this education system in this country. And I think what I bring to the field has not just been my lived experience, but also my PhD. My parents supported me with my undergraduate education and also funded so that I could do my PGC at Oxford University. I got a place there, and that really opened my eyes to where young people really are privileged, and how some people who have privilege, well, we know, have more opportunities and success over others. So how do we make those sorts of doors open to other people? So again, very briefly, jumping back to growing up in Northern Ireland, both of my parents, first in the family to go to university, they both became lawyers. My father was one of the first Catholic judges appointed in Northern Ireland in 1981. And that resulted in us having bodyguards, bulletproof glass in our house. My father carried a gun, and he was very much under threat, as we all were as a family over those 10 years. But it gave me that sort of lived experience about where there is threat in life and where barriers exist and push us back. And what I found over my time in school and working in youth groups and in leading youth groups from the ages of 13 all the way through and still today is that we don't live in isolation. We don't exist by ourselves. And if we are going to succeed, or we are going to be successful, if we are going to try and work through the challenges that we face in life, we need to have those people that are cheerleaders, who listen to us, who support us, who value us. The kind of teachers, the thinking teachers, the research-based teachers that we heard about in the keynote earlier today. That is crucial, that's fundamental. And I think with increasing levels of special educational needs and mental health challenges in schools, we need more of those thinking, research-focused teachers in our classrooms. So for me, collaboration and relationship is crucial. I think lived experience has an impact on all of the young people that we work with in schools and also colleagues that we work with. But I think that there is hope and a way forward if we are able to find our place with others who have similar values and work forward for change. So this particular project I'm going to tell you about, I lead on a number of different projects, international projects for inclusive education, national projects around inclusive education. I recently was awarded, it was the Equity and Innovation Office for Students Award to address equality for disabled students in higher education. That's a 2-year project going forward with 2 other universities, and that will feed into policy as well. So that's another key example, I think, of what can come from long-term collaboration with key people who are working towards the same aims, the colleagues that I have on that project. But this particular project that I am going to share with you today is one example of a variety of other programs, but this is called Are We Included? It's also, this collaboration also draws on my work with Opportunity Plymouth and my work with an Engineering for Inclusion project that we developed in the city for young people with special educational needs. And what I'm hoping to get through with you today is the following sort of breakdown of the talk. I am going to be interrupting and stopping at different points to give you time to ask questions. And I do have a variety of different reflection activities. So it's not just going to be about me standing here talking to you or talking at you. I very much would like to invite your contribution to this space and your consideration on questions, again, as we've heard so eloquently this morning around inclusion and the question, what is inclusion? What does it mean to you in your work as a teacher, as a student teacher, as a mentor, as a parent, as an educator, as a leader? So just going back, this is the breakdown. Okay. Okay, so this particular project really draws on 2 particular theories, 2 particular bodies of knowledge that feed into it. One is around Wenger's model of communities of practice, and the second is around Yemeni et al.'s theories and work around place-based education. Now, many of you will be familiar with place-based education, and many of you will be familiar also with this model of communities of practice. So I think for this particular collaboration that I've been working with colleagues across 2 universities, across all of the city's secondary schools, also with Plymouth City Council, and also with some of the multi-academy trusts and the Plymouth Education Board as well. So we are very much, over the last 4 years, we've become a living, breathing, and impactful, I would say, on the basis of the evidence we've had, community of practice. We very much focus on this notion of place-based education. So again, going back to making this link to the keynote this morning, it's about knowing your people, knowing your place, knowing your pupils, knowing your classroom, knowing your environment, and knowing your organisation. So the place-based education is a fundamental component of this particular work that's been ongoing in the city over the last few years. We've got to know our community more. I had a very interesting meeting with Luke Pollard, who you know was one of our MPs in the city last term. And we talked about this programme and this model that we've been developing and working in schools. And he said, you know, what you've got here is a particular theory, a particular way of working that's breaking down the barriers that we need to do more of in this city. He talked about a city of villages, which he still feels in many ways Plymouth is. Now we need to get beyond that. We've got to become a city where we are working more collaboratively across those postcode areas or those sections of the city and across the schools. So what we've done with this is a really good, I think, example, and we've got the evidence of how we've done that, working across the villages of the city, as it were. So this is my team. I'm part of a wider team. I work with my colleague Sonia, who's based at Marjon, and also Wendy, who is, she was awarded, I think it was a CB or an OB last year for her work in alternative education, in that she has been managing one of the largest pupil referral units in Europe, and that's in Blackpool. She retired just a couple of years ago, but really interesting work coming out from the practices that she developed. And then I have George and Jen also a part. And then the international component is that we work with Professor Umesh Sharma at Monash University, and that's part of an international network, the Consortium of International Teacher Education Development. So again, very much that emphasis on teacher education. And how that's a fundamental part of realising and achieving effective inclusion. If we're not building and empowering and giving agency to our teachers in our schools, then we can't achieve inclusion in the way that we ideally envisage what that actually looks like and what that results in terms of students' achievements beyond just GCSEs, grade 9, etc. So it's about more than that, as we heard about earlier this morning as well. So this is a breakdown of much of what I'm going to go through today. And those of you who'd like to find out a little bit more, I have got a stall, or table rather, out at the front. And I have a series of different handouts which you are free to take, which will give you these links again. These are the three different mentoring programs that I have developed in partnership with my colleagues over the last 4 years. Each of them are funded through different sources. So I kind of juggle a lot of different balls with this in terms of making it work. So we have a variety of different work orders and a variety of different funders that come in and support. The university supports much of the Opportunity Plymouth work. Now that's post-16. So that's working with young people, year 10, who are at the last year of their GCSEs. Now thinking about what next, which is a very challenging time, as you will recall yourself in your own growing up period, about what next, A-levels, apprenticeships, further study, work. Are we included as Key Stage 3? And the Engineering for Inclusion one has been funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering. This is in its second year now, and that's also with year 10 students. That's a summer school. It's a 5-day program of mentoring here on campus. So we've got young people coming into the university. The first time perhaps for many of them, they've actually been at a university, and really explaining and exploring the campus, getting a feel for what university life is like, but also learning about some of the fundamental aspects of engineering and why that's a core aspect of knowledge in terms of the sustainability of our society and our world. And what we've had from each of these programs has been many young people moving on successfully to do A-levels and or then move on to university. But you'll have a look at the statistics on the evidence in a second, but that's just a key overview. So the local and national picture in terms of inclusion, this is kind of just setting the background, which is important for you to have in terms of the understanding and the knowledge, what's really informing the work that we do as a team, as a collaboration across the universities, the Plymouth City Council, and the representation from the schools as well. What's really informing our work? Well, we have an understanding of the background, the crisis that I mentioned earlier, unprecedented socio-cultural challenges, cost of living crisis. I spoke to one of the head teachers we work with on these programs, and they said, you know, what are we? We're teachers, we're also social, you'll know this, we're also social workers, we're also counsellors, we're also mentors, we're also lawyers. It's becoming such an increasing challenge in terms of what's happening in schools and the draw, the demand really that families are placing on schools for support. So how do we respond in a way that's manageable and sustainable and gets results? And again, it comes back to this point that we heard earlier around agency and empowerment and responding to voices. So it's not a case of us going into the communities and going into the school and going into the mentoring sessions and saying, we know what works for you. It's a case of going into the schools and saying, this is a mentoring program that we've done in the last few years. We would like to develop it here as well. What do you think? Which year group do you think would benefit from it? Do you like the program? How could we change it to match your particular needs? And we speak to the pupils on that as well. So that's the context again, just jumping back. So unprecedented socio-cultural challenges, tightening budgets, decreasing attainment levels, we know about that too. And also increase in EHCP applications and school absences, pupil absences, along with elective home education, which we know is having a knock-on effect in terms of pupils' success, pupils' self-esteem, pupils' confidence, and the future really for our education. But as I said, you will all be very familiar with that in terms of your work and lived experience. The Concept Challenge Children is something that some of you may already be using, but we've taken it on board with the work that we're doing with this project, both at the international level, with the sighted community, and also in this work, because we very much work through a socio-cultural lens. I do. I think it's about looking at where the responsibility, where the challenges, where the source of the exclusion actually sits. And I think it very much connects to our keynote this morning, in that we do not lay the blame or the problem with the pupil, with the teacher, with the family. This is a wider cultural issue. It's also a wider societal issue. And I think we're a long way to go in terms of really getting it right to addressing all of these groups so that they are best supported in terms of progression. So these are the young people that we work with in these different programs, who we believe and have seen and observed and spoken to their teachers as well, that they're challenged on a daily basis by their circumstance. And also, as I mentioned, about the challenges they face in schools. If the expectation is we expect you to achieve a grade C or a grade B over the next 10 months, you will listen to what the teacher has to say and you will take that on board and you will learn in the way that we expect all pupils to learn. That's not going to speak to everybody. So we've got to be more responsive. We've got to be thinking about them as individuals. What did they bring into the space? Again, linking into the keynote this morning. They are teachers as well. They've got something to share with their learning space that we can learn from and that the other pupils in that room can also learn from. So we try to work beyond, we do work beyond the labels, but in the context of where we operate, these are the terms that we know are used in our education system. And so we work within those groups for progression with the mentoring programs. Yeah, I think so. How am I doing time-wise? Because I know we've got lost a little bit of time. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so in Plymouth we have high levels of deprivation across the city. We have 41.7% of GCSE entrants attaining grade 5+ in English and maths, compared to 46% in 21-22. We have 16.4% of secondary school pupils with known special education needs, compared to 14.8% nationally. So I think it's important to sort of be familiar with the reality of the background in terms of the demand and the need. And then we also know, and this connects with what we were hearing earlier on about the theory and the practice of what inclusion is and what inclusion is not. We know that there's a disconnect between system leaders and school communities and lived experience. We know that there is a lack of listening and the empowerment of minority groups. We know that there is a focus on standardised assessment, and this comes back to the point we heard earlier around Ofsted and expectations and demand. And if you don't get it right, you're going to lose your job, or if you don't get it right, you're going to be put on special measures. So it's constant pressure, which disempowers, which we know, which we've lived. I'm sure all of you have in your own experiences with education, when you're being told you have to do something that you know is actually not feasible or possible for you to achieve, given the standards or the situation which you're trying to work to. And then also, I'm going to jump in and talk about, I'm going to bring in COVID again, because I think we're still working through that. We really are. And I think there was such a push, because it's all about this new liberal world that we live in and the new liberalisation of our education system. It's about performativity and results. So post-COVID-19, this push to build back better, this push to get results overnight, to really shift results from where they were at a very low ebb after COVID to a very high level overnight. Now that's never going to happen, but the amount of pressure that was put onto schools, put onto leaders, put onto communities, put onto families and teachers resulted, I think, in pushing it back even further, rather than going into those communities and saying, right, here's some resource, what do you think will work? How do we want to make this happen? What are your particular needs? I've started doing, it's another project. I have too many projects, I think. But one of them, but they're all brilliant and I love them. One of them, it's a new one I've just started. I met with, she's the community leader for All Saints. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me mentioning this today. Rachel is her name, and she's a recently appointed lead for community leadership and community management. So she's working with the local community in her school. And the actual hub that they've got set up sits outside the school, so that parents can come in without having to go through the school grounds, because we know that can trigger and be a trauma for many parents who who may have had their own experiences and stories with exclusion and oppression in education. So her work has been setting up and working alongside her head teacher to set up this hub. Now, she's come from a really successful school community in London where they have set up a hub which is now self-sustaining over the last 4 years. They run night classes for parents, they run mentoring schemes for families, they run mentoring programs for pupils, they have recipe nights, and they have afternoon teas. And what she has found since she set up this program a few months ago is that some of the parents are actually coming in to the centre even during holiday time because of the connection and the support that they have found through the classes that she has been running. But the point is that a forum like that, a place like that, it's giving a space to listen to those minority groups or to listen to those voices and to provide support and ultimately agency. And I think if we are going to respond to the challenges that we currently face in education, and we have continued to face since COVID-19, we need to be working from where our communities are at in their individual context. We need to understand those communities, and these sorts of local community hubs and community leadership that works outside of the school but is feeding into the school in terms of then aligning it with attendance results and also attainment results and attendance figures, I think is one positive step forward. So anyway, it's a new project. We're hoping to get some funding for it so that we can do some, I think, important assessment and evaluation of the work and also bring some community stakeholders and champions of the hub forward in leadership capacity to carry on developing more programs with that hub. So again, it's about working with you, being a part of your local community, and listening to those voices and listening to that knowledge that is shared in those spaces as well. Okay, so I'm aware that we've lost a bit of time this morning, but I'm trying to condense this. There's a lot I want to still get through. But what I want to do is I want to give you sort of 5 minutes, and just if you can turn to the person beside you. I mean, your personal definition of inclusion, there's been so many books written on this, and I've had a variety, there's a series of papers. There's another paper actually of my and the team is coming out next month looking at this project, but it also explores this concept of inclusion. What does it mean? What does it make us feel? What do we see when we think of the word inclusion? What have we experienced in terms of the practice of inclusion? When does inclusion become exclusion? We've all seen that in our spaces as well, I'm sure. So I want you to take a couple of minutes to think about this. What is your definition of inclusion? What's been your experience of inclusion? And also, why did you choose this session? What are you hoping to take from it? And I'm going to not plagiarise, but draw on, which I thought was a very good tactic, the keynote this morning, to take away 2 or 3 key things really from the talk today, something that you can take back in terms of your own personal thinking and your own practices, but also what could you take back into your community from the session today? Are you interested in perhaps rolling out one of our mentoring programs with a particular group of kids who you think would really benefit from this? Are you interested in working with some of the other teachers in your school to look at maybe setting up some kind of a community hub that can work with excluded, and they are excluded parents that don't have agency? What and how can we learn from the expertise and the knowledge of our pupils in terms of what works within our school community for them and what doesn't and what needs to shift? So I would just like you to really take 1 or 2 key things from today for yourself and to go back to your community, and hopefully there'll be some questions that can come from that as well in terms of the panel later. So just a couple of minutes really because of the time. Turn to the person beside you, have a chat about that, or just any reflection from what you've heard so far that's sitting with you. Oh, that's not mine. Oh, that is mine. Conversation it's going well, but if I could just ask if anyone would like to just maybe share something from your conversations, something that has emerged in the couple of minutes that you've had that's maybe added to your way of thinking about inclusion, perhaps challenging your perception, or any other thoughts. Yes, thank you.
We didn't actually talk about it, but
that's all right.
Yeah. And that, for me, it's the generational challenges. And I've worked in many, many different schools, and the amount of times I've had a Senko or a leader, so, when I've gone with concerns about a child, that we need to be doing more for this child, and I've been met with, well, just look at the parents. That's where they come from. And that's it, dismissed, finished.
Doors already shut down. It's this child's got no hope kind of attitude.
Absolutely. That's their limit. That's where they've reached their limit, because that's where the limit of the parent is. And it's the parent's fault. And so there isn't a huge amount that we can do.
So it's giving up at the first, what they perceive as the first hurdle, rather than...
also finding reason in their mind for that child stagnating at that point. And then not pushing through that and finding ways to go up that chain. And how can we support, linking into the work that you do, how can, and the projects you've just said, how can we support up the family in order to support down the family, age-wise?
Yeah. So it's intergenerational again, and conversations, I think we see that it's interesting because I'm sure it's in other cities as well. We know it's in other cities as well from the research, but we have intergenerational families living in the same area of the city, and then the next generation. For many, and believe this or not, I know we heard earlier from our keynote about going to the beach and having a lovely walk around the city. There's so many of our young people in this city actually haven't been to the beach. This is Plymouth. Believe that? Yeah. So it's about those opportunities and being given those opportunities, and how do we give those opportunities to young people so that we see beyond just the assumption that, well, they come from this home, or they come from this postcode area, or they're all free school meals family, whatever that might be. We've got to get beyond that barrier. Again, it connects lovely with what we were hearing this morning.
The parents seeing that
there's potential. There are opportunities, and there are potential, which is why it's so important to address and to bring that stakeholder group, the parent group, into those conversations and to work along the school, which is why I think this new project I'm doing with Rachel at All Saints is also another way forward. CPD for teachers, practitioners, absolutely. Thinking teachers, that's what we need. But we also need to be empowering the communities that we're working in, listening to our parents, giving them opportunities for their own progression and development. Because a happy parent can also mean a happy child. So what can we do to really address that as well and listen to those voices? So I think the challenges with inclusion, it's multi-layered. It's not just about what happens in the microcosm of the school classroom. It's about what's going on in the wider macrocosm, in terms of the wider macrosphere of that wider school community, and how we as a school community are linking into and responding to and empowering and listening to our wider community members, including parents, where we can challenge those intergenerational assumptions that are made and the challenges, so that they do have opportunities to progress and to move forward. Okay, I'm going to get through this quickly then. This working definition of inclusion, so just to bring you up to speed to where this collaboration has come to. Last year, Plymouth City Council failed its special educational needs, again, Ofsted, our friends in Ofsted, you're nodding your head, you know about that. Plymouth City Council failed their special educational needs provision across the city by Ofsted. So they are under a series of, they have an action plan, and they have made significant headway, and I want to commend the colleagues at the Plymouth City Council and the senior leaders and the families and the people who've stepped forward to really push for change in a way that's responsive to who we are as a community. And at the same time keeps that focus on inclusion and progression. But one of the key things that Plymouth City have developed over the last so many months is having a really strong, successful Senko working closely with the team in the City Council, but also developing and making the graduated approach more readily accessible to parents and families and teachers through the website, but also through other outreach activities. Now, the inclusion definition that is now used in the City Council as a part of the graduated approach and in the city schools came from work that I did with my team and head teachers about 2 years ago as a part of this place-based partnership. And what we agreed is that inclusive thinking, and for me this really resonates with me, and again it comes back to my lived experience growing up in Northern Ireland, the importance of relationship, and when we are challenged by the other, challenging ourselves to try and get past that, knowing that some of that fear is due to our ignorance and our not knowing what is different to us. So in order to progress and to challenge that, we've got to keep our minds, ears, and as teachers and head teachers or leaders, our doors open, building our reach, growing opportunities, and keeping a focus on progression and success for all. So this particular definition, as I've said, has been written into the graduated approach here in Plymouth and is referred to and used for all schools across the city. You all right, Harriet? Yeah. And the togetherness and belonging, where am I? Yeah, just jump from that one to here. Okay. And this was again from the conversation around the graduate approach and making it more readily accessible for Plymouth teachers and leaders. We have run sessions as a part of this project, as part of this partnership. We've run sessions on togetherness and belonging. Now, we're also, as a part of the Royal Academy of Engineering funded project, we are running a CPD session next month. There are flyers for that in the desk when you arrive on campus. And I've also got more flyers at my desk at the front, so come and see me later. But we're running a CPD session on belonging and togetherness. And really about looking at where we can find the energy and where we address the connection between pupil and teacher and what happens in that space. So rather than having that negative perception about a learner who perhaps may be considered lesser ability or has been labelled in that capacity, we've got to push past that and how we can look at it in a more positive way. As I said, there's a CPD session next month. Do pick it up, the flyer, if you're interested, because we're really going to be looking at togetherness and belonging and what that really means beyond just some nice fluffy words. What does that actually mean in terms of lived experience and real practice? Okay, so we would argue, and this is again coming through some of the work that we've done in our groups with teachers and leaders in schools, we would argue that truly inclusive teachers and practitioners really, so we're talking about teaching assistants as well, support their students to embrace their place within the bigger picture, recognise the classroom as a space for collaboration, a melting pot enhanced by diversity and difference, and are willing to adapt to and champion the needs and contributions of every student rather than expecting students to adapt to the teacher, as we heard about earlier this morning as well. So a nice segue into that point that was made earlier. So I'm going to whiz through this very briefly. There were 3 stages in terms of this place-based collaboration that's been going on now for, as I said, 3-4 years. We did a series of research studies, three stages to it. We had questionnaires, we had interviews, and then we co-created in partnership with school leaders a mentoring program for young people who may be challenged or disadvantaged in education. And that was for Key Stage 3, and then as I mentioned, we have the Key Stage, the Year 10 one, as well as the engineering programme. So we had, and again, I think the response was very insightful. I think that also tells a story in itself. The fact that we had nearly 1,500 responses to our questionnaire across 10 schools, many of which came from parents and carers, many of which came from students Year 7, the majority from students Year 7 and 10, which I think really strengthens, validates and legitimises the findings that we had, because it's coming from the actual horse's mouth, the lived experience, the pupil, and then also teachers and leaders. And that was to look at the experience and the perception of practitioners as to what is efficacy for inclusion. So what makes an effective practitioner of inclusion? What makes an effective school for inclusion? How do we feel if we are part of a successful school for inclusion, if we're a pupil, if we're a teacher, and if we're a parent? So as I said, we distributed the questionnaires across all the schools, and we got a pretty strong response rate, we would say. In the field, that's quite a good response rate, 1,500. And what we discovered, well, that's an example of the questionnaire. Yeah, I mean, this is just an example of some of the questions and the statements that were given out. But what we discovered were the following. 54% of pupils were not satisfied with how included they felt in school. That's more than 50% of all the pupils that responded to the questionnaire. I'm going to let that sit with you. And those were the statements that they were being asked to respond to in the questionnaire. So more than 50% of pupils, of the responses that we had, of which there were 907, years 7 and 10, more than half of those young people do not enjoy coming to school every day. More than half of those people maintain that they are not receiving enough help from teachers and school staff if they're struggling to do their schoolwork. More than half don't feel that their teachers are making sure that all students are actively participating. More than half do not feel they have at least one teacher or adult in the school that they can contact or turn to if they're facing difficulties. More than half have been bullied by other pupils, and more than half don't feel or don't perceive that teachers in their school are working effectively with each other. So that says, we talked this through then with the head teachers, some of the sessions that we had afterwards, and also with the teachers. We went back into the schools and we said, these are the results we've had, what are we going to do next? And there was very much a sense in the meetings as a part of this place-based partnership that the growing need was not just to support teachers so that they are valued, so that they're enabled to give off their best, but also to provide that CPD, but also to really work with those young people in terms of mentoring. Now, teachers increasingly have more and more to do. We're expected to get increasingly better results in our classroom every year. And there's always more demands being made. So how do we fit in issues like, for example, personal health and social education? Where do we fit in post-16 progression and careers? We're expected to do that. Some schools do it better than others. Some communities are able to bring external providers in to better support. But how do we really address that so that we have more effective progression in terms of post-16, which is another indicator around success and inclusion? So the conversation that we had in one of the place-based meetings was that in terms of priorities and need and resources, let's develop a mentoring program for those young people who are this 50%, who don't feel included, who don't feel best supported, who don't feel that teachers understand them, who don't feel there's a lead that gets them or that is there to support them. And we agreed, well, let's co-create a mentoring program where we train up some exceptional, I can see some in the room, wonderful, I'm so glad you're here, some exceptional mentors from the university, students who are not that much older than the young people themselves, to then go into schools and work on mentoring around post-16 progression, work on mentoring around self-esteem and self-worth, and what education, the question, what is education for, and really help young people to think about that and where they see their self and place in that. So the mentoring program that we devised, I'm just going to jump straight to, I'll come back to that in a second, was a series of, here we go, a series of 6 weeks for the Are We Included program, 10 weeks for the Opportunity Plymouth program, and we've been rolling those out now consistently for the last 3 years with consistently positive evaluations in terms of impact. As I mentioned, the funding has come from a variety of different resources and constantly knocking on doors and asking for money, but we've been pretty successful so far in getting that. But we have the statistics, we have the evaluations, and they speak a lot for themselves, particularly from the pupils' voices. And what we have then with the Are We Included program, which is one example, just briefly to give you insight into that, is a 6-week program where we focus on different aspects, different themes that we know from the research, from our own research and from the literature, really have an impact in terms of inclusive experience and inclusive education outcomes. So our student mentors are trained to become mentors. They go into the schools working in teams of about 3 or 4. They work with approximately 15 young people for 1 hour a week over 6 weeks or over 10 weeks if it's the Opportunity Plymouth programme, or over an entire summer school week, Monday to Friday, 9 till 4 in June for 1 week. And they focus on getting to know each other and positive role models. Second week is about aspiration, what that really means. Third week is about access, and we know the importance of resilience for our young people, increasingly the need for more of that. And if we're going to be resilient, well, the first thing we need is confidence. We need to know our worth, have a sense of our self-worth, what we're good at, what we're confident about, and in order to progress and to access learning. Attainment, fifth week's about achievement, and the sixth week is very much a celebration event at the university, which is always a wonderful event. We have teachers come along, the mentors are there, the pupils are there, they get their certificates. They speak in front of a whole lecture theatre of other people. These are young people who perhaps in the first 2 weeks of the mentoring programme have not connected even with their mentor. And here they are 7, 8 weeks on, 10 weeks on after Opportunity Plymouth, where they're actually contributing and sharing their learning and their thoughts in that situation or in that environment. So we have the termly evaluations, and if I can just jump to those, these are some of the key findings. I'll just give you a minute just to look at that. But the pupils themselves are reporting increased feelings of inclusion and belonging. We know from class charts and other sources that the schools use that there's an improvement in attendance and behaviour and academic progress. We know that the school staff who've been directly involved in the rollout of the programmes with us and the mentors talk about feeling more confident in terms of their work and their position as inclusive practitioners. And we know that the questionnaires that we sent out to parents as well report how their young people, their children, are now talking about enjoying attending school more often and more readily engaging with learning. So what has the impact been so far? I think the total number of school pupils mentored, that's including both RB Included, Opportunity Plymouth and the Engineering for Inclusion programme. So we've reached out and we've worked with 532 young people. We have trained 89 university students as mentors, many of whom stay with the programme. I've got some mentors who've actually worked with me over the last 3 years, consecutive years. They continue to be a part of the scheme because they benefit from it themselves. They see the impact it's making in schools and they want to be a part of that energising space, as it were. And we've had 40 school staff who continue to take part in the evaluation side of the programme, because something is only ever as good as the feedback at that time, and you have to continuously improve. Yeah, so you're working on the evaluation every year and enhancing it, revising it. Again, that important ingredient about effective co-creation. Nobody is the expert here. Yeah, we come with our knowledge, we share that knowledge, we bring it into the space, we look at the feedback and the results from our evaluation every year. We talk to our funders as well to try and secure the funding for another year, and it's not guaranteed every year. But so far we've been okay. We speak to the teachers, we speak to the pupils, we speak to the families, and then on the basis of their feedback, we tweak, we change, we recreate the programme for the next year. Again, continual improvement, and also responding to whatever the particular changing environment and education demands and priorities are within each of the schools we work, because that shifts all the time, as you well know. I wanted to just jump back. How are we doing for time? Okay, we've got 10 minutes. I just wanted to jump back very briefly to give you some of the other questionnaire results, because I think it's important that these are the kind of the results that are coming back from our students, but also in terms of the research, our teachers, the questionnaire that the teachers had and that responded to, these were some of the areas of really low confidence and where they felt significantly low in confidence. And again, this ties to some of the key, really strong points we heard earlier in the keynote about working to empower our teachers, giving them the space to further develop their knowledge, their expertise, their agency, giving them further sense of ability to make informed decisions and know that it's the right decision, and they're being supported by their leaders to carry on with that particular form of practice that they know is making an impact with a particular student group or a pupil group. So it's about building their confidence. So whilst we're talking about a mental health crisis and an increasing crisis around self-esteem with regards to our young people, it's not just our young people, it's our teachers as well. It's our leaders as well. It's our families as well. So we need to be, I think, responsive and considered with that point as well. It's not just about going into schools and focusing on what we need to do better with our pupils. It's what we need to do better as a wider community, and then to really move that forward. So these were the results from the questionnaire from teachers and leaders. These were the lack of confidence. I think it's quite clear. Getting access to parents, adapting teacher to support a student who is failing, or I would change the language there, who is being failed, again, by, I think, the culture and the system that we have that's enforced upon our schools. Being challenged by preventing disruptive behaviour before it occurs, how to do better at that. And I think it's about knowing your pupils in many ways, and knowing your families and knowing your community and those relationships. Dealing with physically aggressive behaviour, informing colleagues of laws and policies relevant to SEND provision and inclusion. So a lot of key areas where teachers and leaders reported lack of confidence. And I think much of it is about having the space and the time to engage with continuing professional development, and also to engage in their own learning that can be sustained going forward then in terms of their practice, subsequent practice. So that's just a quick snapshot then. So not only are pupils feeling disempowered, more than 50%, practitioners are as well. And we know in terms of the funding situation and the revised code of practice, whenever that will finally come out, this is a crisis situation we're dealing with in terms of diversity and responding effectively to inclusive provision, which, as we know, is much more than just about special education needs disability. Yeah, it's broader than that. These are other areas of concern, other intersections that I talked about and mentioned earlier that we need to bring into the picture. So we had a series of interviews. I'm not going to take too much time on that, but I just want to run through these quickly. The interviews we had were with teachers, with families, and with leaders in schools. And what we found, again, I don't think any of you will be surprised by this. You live with it on a daily basis, either as a family member or as a practitioner. These are the key areas, key themes that were coming up for our school communities. Themes were challenges regarding behaviour, challenges regarding trying to foster and sustain positive relationships, challenges with regards making sure all young people get access to extracurricular activity. And of course, we know that's all tied up in cultural capital as well. And those families for whom financial resources, as well as knowing who to speak to, will open doors, as opposed to those families who don't have that access. So how are we responding to those families? Because I think that's another area where these community hubs that I mentioned earlier, I think that's something else that can be picked up, can be located in that space, really empowering those families so that they can develop their own sense of their own cultural capital, and being able to ask those questions and to push for opportunities that should be given to them, as well as to those that happen to have the money and the resource and access. We also did, I'm just going to throw this in very briefly, but we also did, the Department for Education funded us 2 years ago to do an evaluation of the place-based project, the place-based school improvement work in Plymouth. And there's further reports and information on that in our Are We Included website, so you can get access to that through that source. I think what we've found from this was a series of action points, or what came out of this was a series of action points which have all been brought into the action plan post-Ofsted special educational needs for Plymouth City Council. So I think lots of research informing that, which is really important. So it's not just a case of this is what we're being told by government or being told by so-called leaders in education that we must do. I think Plymouth have got to do it in terms of what's right for them. So what does our research in terms of our city, what does our research tell us is working? What does our research tell us is not working? What does our research tell us we need to be doing more of? And then that feeding into the action points and the plan for future development. And again, our place-based report has fed into that, which I think strengthens the subsequent work that's been going on. Okay, so what's next? How are we doing time? Okay, I want to give you some time as well for a final activity. But what's next? We've got further funding. The Connect Multi-Academy Trust has funded a rollout in 2 primary schools for the programme. So we now have again, it's a 6-week mentoring programme in primary, and we'll be rolling out more of that in the new year. We've just started to pilot a 10-week tailored programme for looked after children. That's with Stoke Damerel School, and that's going to be it's an exciting venture for the work. And it's something that has taken many, many months of co-creation with the head teacher, with the teachers, and with the Plymouth City Council leaders with responsibility for those young people. And those young people will very much feed into the work as well over the next 10 weeks. So we've just started. We had the first session with the young people this week. And as is the case with all of these programmes, what we are seeing is a challenge, and I think it's reflected in the wider challenge around inclusion in schools, is that around attendance and really trying to encourage young people to get involved, to be involved. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that whatever it is we're trying to do is going to be reachable to them, speaks their language, which is why our wonderful mentors who are not that much older than them definitely help, because you know the movies, you know the music, you know whoever's hot on the different magazines that they read. And that's been a really good connection. So the point really that I'm trying to pull out is that we need to co-create these projects. We can't come in and say, well, I'm the expert. This is what you must do in order to get better at being inclusive. This is what you must do in order to get better at learning. It's got to be a case of, this is what we ideally want. How do we get there? What are your thoughts? What have your experiences been? What is your knowledge? What is your expertise? What can we pull out of that? And then map in terms of our research and our work to develop a programme that's going to make an impact here. So as I said, we've just started the pilot for children in care this week, and we're hoping, if all goes well with that, to sustain the funding going forward so we can roll that out in other schools as well. And we're also, we're also part of a global study then on parent care perceptions, and I think that's another key strand of this work. And what we've really found over the last few years working in the Plymouth context with this place-based work, it's about reaching out to and getting the parents and carers involved. And that's been a significant challenge, I think, in the work. And the more we can get better at that, I think the stronger we'll be in our school communities in terms of the impact we're having around attendance and achievement and well-being. Okay, so that's a global study that we're doing. And I would like to just end it really with you. So questions really for you to think about in terms of what you've heard with regards to the project, the programmes, the way in which we're working and continuing to work. How does that speak to you from your position? What are you already doing well? And I think you've got to start from a position of strength with any of this. Any of these matters or any of these projects. You've got to think about what is it that you already do well, and there will be so much that you already do well within your school communities in terms of the way that you work with your practitioners, the way that you work with your teachers, the way that you respond to your pupils. I had a really lovely conversation with one of the Senkos that we did a CPD session last year, and she talked about how at parent evenings she goes to the back. I thought, what do you mean by go to the back? Well, when we have a parents' evening, I always make a point of going to the back of the room to speak to the parents there, because they're the parents who I really need to connect with. They're the parents who are feeling disempowered or perhaps triggered by coming into the school environment. I've got to connect with them. I've got to hear their views. I've got to learn from what they've got to say about their experiences and their needs as a family, not just the young person. So that for me was an example of of really good practice, and she's seen some significant improvement in terms of her young people that she's working with, and I think that's probably because she's getting on board and working with those families so effectively. So my point here is it's just think about what you know you're doing in your spaces that is having an impact. What you're observing that's having an impact? What's been a significant achievement for you in your work with regards to inclusion, and how could other people learn from that as well? So what are the key priority areas or challenges that you feel your school community or your family or your colleagues are facing with regards to inclusion? And of course, as we know, each child is different. Each school is different, each community is different, so it's going to be varied. It's not a case of one size fits all. Which individuals or organisations exist in your space that you can reach out to? And I don't mean by that just education organisations. What about industry organisations? What about your universities and, say, for example, your city college as well? What work are they doing that's community-based that perhaps you could tap into? How could you invite perhaps a CEO of some of the third sector organisations, maybe even Plymouth Argyle, to come along and talk about their outreach work? What can we benefit? How can we benefit more from work that's already happening in our city that we just need to tap into and bring into our spaces? And again, very much reflects what was said earlier. Take away 2 or 3 key points or insights from today's session for you in terms of your own work, something that you might do differently, something that you're going to take forward, and something that you want to take back to your community. And what action do you currently feel able to take forward for inclusion? And it's also, how will you do that? So we might think, okay, I want to get involved in the mentoring programme. Okay, fine, great. But there are various hurdles then that you need to address when you go back to your school community. Will your head teacher be interested? Will your other teachers be interested? How do you reach out to the families? And these are questions, I think, that we need to have conversations about in order to tailor the programme to your particular school community. As I said before, it's about co-creation, it's about evaluation, it's about agency, and it's about representation. And I think that's the only way we can really go forward in terms of inclusive provision and good inclusive practice across the piece, really. But that's very much how we roll out and manage our mentoring programmes. So you may have some questions for me. I know that we're taking those questions back to the panel this afternoon as well. But I would welcome really in the last, well, we're already 3 minutes over, but just very quickly in the last half a minute or a minute, just some thoughts or ideas that you currently have, having heard what I've been talking about, having considered some of these questions about inclusion, the challenges, and the sorts of tools that we've developed. What are your thoughts? What's really speaking to you now? What's sitting at the forefront of your mind, apart from it's lunchtime? Perhaps, yes.
I'm a parent.
Yes.
Of an autistic child.
Yeah.
And we waited 4 years for a diagnosis and then signed off. And it's all down to the school to help with anything that comes from his autism diagnosis. But the teachers are not getting trained. They're not getting trained with how to deal with autistic children. And so our class has got 25 children in, and 15 of them are neurodivergent. And they do not know how to, help them to the best of their ability. My son's 8 years old, and if you say to him, how does school make you feel? He says, it makes me feel like I'm shame, like bad about myself.
Yeah.
And it's because
Which connects to what we find.
Teachers need to be trained in neurodiverse behaviours
Yeah.
and things like that. And
Yeah.
I think if we train the teachers to see this and to maybe neuroaffirm and things like that instead of shaming behaviours that they cannot control, it's going to make a huge difference going forward.
I think training is essential and is really important, but I'm also aware that there are other people as well that want to jump in response to that as well, so I do want to open it up. So, yeah, colleague here, and then over to you. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to kind of lead on from that.
Yeah.
I think the takeaway for me is the amount of disengaged students after CPD sessions that are not informed by what is actually happening within communities, schools, and it's like, how are the CPD sessions actually reflecting the environment that you're in, as opposed to just looking for a course that you think might be really good for teaching and learning and things like that. So I suppose my takeaway is, how is that more informed in order to kind of like address, you know, your school community and the needs of your parents, your staff, your students collectively, you know. So I think for me that's a big takeaway, is how we think about that more.
So it's sort of relevant CPD for that relevant community and that particular. So it's again, it's that point about it's not one size fits all.
It's equity, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's you know, rather than the equality giving everyone the same, it's
Yeah.
equity in what do we.
Which we heard about this morning as well, which is really important. It's like, you know, you've all seen that postcard, I'm sure, where you have isn't it a tree and there's a I can't remember. I think you've got a giraffe and it's a monkey and somebody else, and they're all being told you've got to get to the top of that tree, and they're all given one tool, which is actually only going to work for the monkey but not for the rest. And so again, it's about equity. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then we had another point here.
So 2 points. I've got something very specific for you after, so I'll grab them before lunch, if that's all right. Might help.
Okay.
And the other one was really struck home with what you said to me, to us about belonging and togetherness. It's really important. I recently finished listening to an audiobook called Belonging by Owen Eastwood, which if you haven't read it, is absolutely terrific and really, really does help hit home about how people feel in their place as well. So that for me really, really struck home, because we work in a independent special, and we want our children to feel they belong in that place, and that is an ongoing challenge for us.
Of course.
But something that we really do try and home in on every day.
Okay.
That's what I'm taking away.
That's fantastic. And that point about it's something that you reflect on every day, is that brought into your sort of when you all come together in the morning as a group of practitioners before the day starts, we want to think about this. What have we done differently over the last what? Yeah, go on, share a bit more.
Yeah, we do that every day, twice a day, before and after.
How do you do it?
Usually within the teaching groups,
Yeah.
and it's usually quite open plan. So it's not really very structured in terms of assessing what we're doing. It's
Exactly.
what did the learner need that day?
Yeah.
What might they need tomorrow?
Yeah.
We use grounding
Okay.
and check-in at the start of the day and the end of the day, and we've project-based learning curriculum throughout the day, so it's interwoven.
Brilliant. So again, another lovely connection to the keynote earlier.
To the
So yeah,
recognition and
exactly.
what we
Yeah,
talked about
yeah.
earlier.
Empowerment, learning, work-based tools. Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to sort of come on what this lady mentioned earlier about parents, and I worked as a key worker for an AP for 2 years, and I attended children in need meetings and multi-agency meetings, and I remember attending one of those meetings, and it particularly struck me that when working with a child afterwards, that the parent came to me and said, "You're the first person in a meeting about my child that's focused on their strengths." And I think there's a real gap in the knowledge that teachers are having about strengths-based training rather than like specific skills training, like actually focusing around the strengths and the relational approaches was said in the keynote. More of an observation and sharing an experience than a question, but that was something that really struck me when we were talking about inclusion, exclusion. The challenges that parents do face and the attitudes of professionals towards parents, and there's a real challenge.
And that's so important, because I think you've got to start from strengths. And I think I think you can apply that to so many different dimensions and domains within education, and whether you're talking about the inclusion or the effective education of new teachers, or the effective progression of families in the community, or the effective progression of young people in a classroom. You start from their strengths. And what we do again with the mentoring program is that's one of the key things that we focus on, is we talk about a particular tool, excuse me, a particular tool that we've developed called the Personal Shield. Do one of you guys want to say a little word about the Personal Shield, and then we'll wrap up, because I think it's a really good example of how we how we work with those young people to see where their strengths are, and that personal shield that they co-create with their mentors really reinforces that sense of self-worth. These are my strengths, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm going to do moving forward to get better at, or a new activity or a new skill.
I think we use a modified version of Personal Shield, but the actual idea is them projecting what they actually have, the strength that they have. And what we did the other day in the kind of me map thing, we actually circulated it around the table between 4 bunch of students, and each one of them wrote things about each other which they didn't know about themselves. And that made them feel so happy, and at the same time they felt that, oh, they are capable of doing certain things which they don't think that they are capable of. Something that whole diagram shows is like, oh, that is something in between the pillar, the personal shield thing, and it actually shows that, okay, you are going to see your limitations, strengths, as well as you're going to see what you are capable of doing. So somewhere there were kids where they were not able to actually jot it down. We did this for them to be more constructive rather than them seeing their sheets empty. So it really helps, and I really like the idea that this was implemented.
But again, it's about that notion of strength and being told by others, this is your strength.
You'd be surprised how many children that I worked with would readily note all of their weaknesses.
Oh, absolutely. And we this is what we see every time with these programs. Yeah, to start with. We've got to get better at that. Strengths, relational work, and co-creation for inclusion, I think, is the way forward within our communities and with our teachers and with our pupils. Thank you.